That's okay? Great.
Yeah, we have received a series of documents. So
we are looking forward to your views on that, sir.
I have gone through all the pages because I like reading. So,
Great, sir. Good to hear.
Congress for such a comprehensive report.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, sir.
A good read for me, and many suggestions that you have made that will be useful for policymakers. I may recommend many of them to state government. Yeah.
No, it's meant to be something that we can all engage in together. So it'll be, I think, I'm hoping today's discussion will be a great starting point for.
Yes, yes, that's true. This is the whole bunch.
Very kind of you, sir. Great.
Yes, we can start.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for joining us today for the launch of our working paper series titled The State of India's Pollution Control Board. We are absolutely delighted today to host our panelists for the day, Dr. Ashok Kumar Ghosh, Anumita Roy Chaudhary, Dr. Ajay Deshpande, and Karen Seppertson. Today we are launching this, the series that we are launching today on the state pollution control boards is based on research that we started a little more than a year ago at the Center for Policy Research, where we are focusing on 10 state pollution control boards and the Delhi Pollution Control Committee, which are all of them states situated in the Indo-Gangetic Plain. As part of the series, today we are launching 3 papers, and we are hopeful to launch another one in a few months once all our data has come in. And all of this is now available on our website, along with the relevant annexures and the data that we've relied on. I'll request one of my colleagues to put on the link in the chat box as I speak. So before we begin, just a few things. This is in webinar mode. If people in the audience have any questions or comments, please do raise them in the Q&A, and we hope to collect them at the end of the panel discussion and raise them with our panelists for the day. Right, so if we could now begin with the presentation, Bhargav. Thank you so much. Thank you. So as I said, our study looks at the state pollution control boards in the Indo-Gangetic Plain. And the reason we decided to focus on this region is obviously because it's one of the most polluted regions in the world. And the levels of air quality that I experience here, they also contribute to significant adverse health effects, and studies are just mounting in this area. The problem is particularly complicated because of plurality of sources, as well as the interconnected nature of the sources and the effect, and the whole airshed level regulation that is required to address the problem. This deteriorating level of air quality has meant that one of the areas that has become a kind of point of focus is the institutions, and particularly our frontline regulators, pollution regulators, which are the state pollution control boards. Yet little has changed in their approach over time. These were set up under the Water Act in 1974, so some of them are over 4 decades old. And some of them continue, in fact, most of them continue to focus exclusively on industrial sources, even though their remit is much larger. And the law allows them to look at much wider set of sources, both in water pollution as well as air pollution. So over the years, as we know, several reports, both from the government as well as non-governmental organizations, going back to 1984, the Bhattacharya Committee report, the Beliappa Committee report, the Planning Commission report, even a report by the Parliamentary Standing Committee. Several reports over the years have highlighted the shortcomings in the functioning of state pollution control boards. Spread the spectrum of issues is staffing, finances, poor training of personnel, poor quality of leadership. All of these challenges have been highlighted earlier. But these challenges are also now coming in limelight and also getting exacerbated as there are changes in the regulatory framework. We now have the NCAP since 2019. The new kid on the block, the institutional kid on the block, the Commission on Air Quality Management for the NCR, a huge pot of money through the 15th Finance Commission. So now there's a renewed kind of look towards the institutional frameworks that supports air quality regulation in the country and whether they are able to deliver on their basic mandate. They also have a greater responsibility, of course. I mean, many of us who study this area of air quality, there's obviously a need for coordination across state boundaries, between the federal setup, across multiple departments, and also in subnational level with the states and the urban local bodies. And as I mentioned earlier, with the Finance Commission grants coming into the urban local bodies. So the question really is, are they capable? Are the state pollution control boards capable in their current state of managing this expanded policy remit, while also dealing with their existing statutory mandate of regulating all forms of pollution, including the industrial pollution? So we decided to kind of set out research questions for ourselves, and these were the basic research questions. What is the ability and capacity of state pollution control boards and the PCC to perform their statutory function? What is the role of the board? And when I say board here, we meant actually the group of persons, 15 to 17 persons who form the board, which is then kind of supported by the staff of the board. In performing the mandate of the SPCBs under the law? Does the leadership in the IGP actually have the necessary expertise to function and discharge its mandate? And are there adequate number of technically qualified persons actually staffing these agencies? This has resulted in a series, as I said before, of 3 working papers, and with a 4th, which is coming soon, on finances of state pollution control boards. Finally, on the issue of methods, we filed a series of RTIs with all these SPCBs in August and September of last year, particularly asking them questions on the composition of the board, the presence of non-official members, what is their expertise and their qualifications, the tenure and qualifications of the chairpersons and member secretaries, whether their role was a full-time role or not, and what kind of recruitment rules have been issued, and what is a current sanction strength, vacancies, what have been the attempts at filling these vacancies, and these kind of questions through RTIs. I must mention here that all the responses that we received through the RTIs, we have uploaded on our website, and we are very happy for other organizations to look at that and take this research work forward if they so please. We've also done a lot of secondary research based on previously published reports and data available on the official websites. And finally, several people, senior officials of these PCBs are very kind to spend time with us through semi-structured key informant interviews to give us more kind of on-the-ground look on what's happening. So the 3 papers that we are releasing today, the first one is Who Has a Seat at the Table? It looks at the composition of the boards and their ability to engage in policy making. So who are the non-official members? Who is the chairperson? Who's at the helm? This is the second one, which focuses just on the leadership, the chairperson and the member secretary. What's the length and stability of their tenure and whether they are well placed to guide the board's functioning. And finally, who is in the field, looking at the adequacy of the board's capacity, particularly the technical capacity, whether they are able to perform the critical functions as consent granting, inspection, monitoring. So now I'll hand over to my colleague, Arunesh, who's been part of our team, to take us through the.
Thank you, Shivani. So hello, everybody. Let's take a quick look at the first working paper in the series. The focus here is on the members of the boards. So in this table, what we've done is we've grouped all the board members across the 10 states into separate categories. Some clear highlights from this table are that the state government departments, local authorities, and especially the industry or infrastructure related representatives are overwhelmingly represented on the board. Civil society and potentially affected parties are not really represented, and academics, scientists, medical practitioners, and researchers are a small fraction in comparison. State government departments are at 37%, This raises, given this kind of a split that we see in this table, we see that there is a question that can arise regarding the conflicts of interest, because you see typically the entities who represent potentially polluting corporations or local authorities or industries are represented more than those who represent those who are affected by these various entities. Next slide, please. In this particular figure, what we see is the data labels indicate the members of the board. And on the left side, we've also given a percentage share. It's to explain the share of technical and to non-technical members that are present across the board. So it's quite a stark takeaway. Technical expertise is sorely lacking across the board. And more concerningly, no board has been able to substantiate with any sort of requisite data that they have the mandated 2 air quality experts on the board as required under the Air Act. So three states provided this response, and out of those 3, Bihar claims that 2 mayors are air quality experts, and Chhattisgarh claimed that the managing directors of their forest development corporations and the infrastructure development corporations were air quality experts. So here are some takeaways that we gathered from analyzing the board meeting minutes from 3 states. For 7 states, this data was not available, so the scope of these observations is limited by that. So states of Uttarakhand, Haryana, and Delhi were the states that provided the meeting minutes online, on the basis of which we've drawn these observations. So boards are largely engaging in only procedural matters limited to administration, finance, staff-related issues, day-to-day matters of how the board functions, and so forth. Discussions on technical issues are limited largely to approval of new guidelines for consent management, external research projects, setting up of monitoring stations, and other aspects around industrial pollution. So this is actually, when taken in contrast to the limited, if any, discussion that happens around other issues of pollution control that are not related to industrial sources. So it becomes quite clear that the boards are focusing almost exclusively on industrial pollution sources when it comes to these issues. And on the rare occasion when these discussions do occur, the value of technical members is quite stark, and expert members contribute substantially in these discussions. There is and there is also little evidence to show that boards are taking an active role in facilitating interdepartmental coordination. And this is a little surprising given just the first figure, the first table that I showed you, and the representation share that government boards, government departments have on these boards. Yet it's the kind of interdepartmental coordination to tackle something that encompasses many different sectors is not present, at least in the board meetings. And board also, the board is also kind of limiting itself in not engaging with certain in any sort of substantive oversight and daily functioning of the leadership and the staff. So here we have certain interesting quotes that we can share with you, that we that were shared with us during our interviews that we conducted across the states. We conducted interviews in 5 states, and also managed to engage with a few senior CPCB officials, former CPCB officials. So the first quote deals with a conflict of interest and highlights that the representation of polluters or is present, and even local government, in fact, can be a big polluter. And then in the second quote, we look at aspects of decision making and how the board is sort of limiting itself in taking actual substantive decisions, and the leadership, which is the chairperson and the member secretary, effectively do that. And when it comes to frequency of meetings, we had a particular state tell us that, quite surprisingly, that there is not much work And that's because there is a low level of industrialization in the state. So often there is not enough agenda items to conduct the needed 4 board meetings in a year. And one former CPCP official said that the board is not doing anything substantial, and it is only a board in name. And now I'd like to hand over to Bhargav to take us forward.
Thank you, Arnish. Moving along, these are insights from the second paper, which is talking about the leadership of these pollution control boards. So in our analysis of data that we collected through the RTIs, the first thing that we found that there is a strong preference for government candidates in the roles for both the chairperson and the member secretary. And in fact, the way that the recruitment rules for most states are framed almost precludes individuals without government service from even qualifying for the role in the first place. The question that this raises is whether the autonomy of the SPCBs that is present in the law is really played out in practice if key leadership are essentially seconded by the government to be able to carry out this role. The second is the aspect of leadership being largely part-time. So the post of the chairperson is not full-time in most states. And many chairpersons, as we have observed in the report itself, also hold additional charge of other departments. Present company on this panel excluded, of course. The third is that the 3 member secretaries, the member secretary's role is meant to be a full-time position, but 3 member secretaries, as we have seen from our analysis, hold additional charge of other departments. In one case, the member secretary holds 2 other department charges. And this is sort of in contrast to the legal requirement that requires a full-time person in this role. And the third is that most individuals in these roles lack a technical background. Chairperson and MS candidates, unless they're specifically people who have been promoted internally, either they've been long-serving environmental engineers or some such professional qualifications, or whether they have those specific educational qualifications, largely lack experience in environmental management. And the preference for the civil servants in these roles, and this came out during interviews as well, especially for the position of chairperson, the preference for civil servants in these roles, even within the SPCBs themselves, is based on a belief that they are there to somehow balance interests between the needs of the environment and the needs of industry. Now, the question of whether that is the role of an environmental regulator is something that is to be debated. And lastly, the thing that we saw was that there's a wide variation in the length of tenures for both of these positions. And in large cases, there are very brief tenures for individuals both in the chairperson and secretary roles, the shortest being 18 days for chairperson in Chhattisgarh and 15 days for a member secretary in Haryana and Uttar Pradesh, most likely holding additional charge during those periods. And the big issue with this is the fact that frequent transfers of board leadership or the lack of a substantial tenure makes it challenging for these boards to really conceptualize and deliver on any kind of long-term strategy on pollution reduction. So to go through an example of what we were talking about, this is a snapshot of the past 5 chairpersons as we requested from these SPCBs, the length of their tenure. And you can see that for Bihar, for instance, the past 5 chairpersons span all the way from 2004 up to 2022, whereas for Delhi and for Haryana, it is basically from late 2016, early 2017. So 5 years versus 18 years, there's a substantial difference in the length of the tenure. You also have exceptionally short tenures here, as we've seen before. Who leads these states also is quite interesting. So for instance, our current panelist, Dr. Ashok Ghosh, is a full-time chairperson of the Bihar State Pollution Control Board and is a scientist of background and so has the requisite expertise to lead a PCB. The Chhattisgarh Environment Conservation Board chairperson is notionally supposed to be full-time, but is also, in fact, according to their own recruitment rules, is required to be full-time, but is currently the senior most civil servant in the state. He's the additional chief secretary in the chief minister's office and holds additional charge of 2 other departments. And so how exactly is that full-time? In Delhi, the previous chairperson was a part-time ex officio role, whereas now we know that the position is currently unoccupied and is likely to be filled in the coming months. Whereas in Haryana, again, the chairperson is a part-time role and is currently occupied by an IAS officer. So to run through a few insights on the leadership that we gathered from our interviews, the first was from a member secretary of the state number 1, which talks about really the relationship between the SPCBs and the state pollution control boards and how the SPCBs view their own relationship with industry, with the environment, and with the government. And so he says, The SPCB cannot work in a silo outside of the government. And so it is best to have a chairperson that has a mix of scientific and administrative know-how. The second is from the chairperson of state 2, who noted that ULB's urban local bodies in this case, and he referred to other departments as well, only listen to the SPCB because I am a senior IAS rank. Being a civil servant helps. And so this raises questions of how effectively SPCBs can deliver on their coordinating, convening role that they're required to do. On the role of the member secretary of state number 6 noted that we have the people who understand the problem. We need to have people who understand the problem and what is going on. We, the environmental engineers, as he noted, have understood these problems for the last so many years. So we need some person who can understand the problem right, and he may be able to give the right solution. And this is where there was a point of difference in our interviews between who is qualified to be a chairperson versus who's qualified to be a member secretary. There was largely unanimous response in terms of believing that there should be a quote unquote technical person or person with a technical background in the role of the member secretary, whereas a chairperson could be a generalist. There's some disagreement even within the interviewees on whether that is the case or not, but on the member secretary role, that was largely unanimous. But the member secretary of state 1, for instance, noted that there should be an IAFS or an IAS officer as their member secretary in that full-time position, because it would allow the state to retain control over the board and counteract corruption. The control of the state government is necessary as a lot of money is involved. So again, there's sort of challenging points here raised with respect to autonomy, their recognition of their role within the state, the relationship with the state, and the role of IAS officers or civil servants within the SPCBs. The third paper focuses on the staff, and so running through some quick highlights on this. The first is, of course, a universally recognized problem, which is the SPCBs are severely short-staffed. Across all the 9 of the 10 boards that we reviewed, at least 40% of all posts are vacant. But the vacancy rates are particularly challenging in the case of technical positions, which is environmental engineers and scientists. So for instance, in Jharkhand, there's an 84% vacancy rate for these positions. With only one state across all of that we've studied has greater than 75% occupancy for these technical positions, which was Rajasthan. The effect of industrialization, rapid industrialization, and the expansion of the mandate has had a severe impact. In particular, the fact that biomedical waste, hazardous waste, and electronic waste have been brought under the SPCB purview have substantially expanded the portfolio of work that lies at the table of an environmental engineer. Rapid industrialization has also meant that in many cases, there's been a doubling of or a tripling of the number of industries that are required to be inspected within a particular state, but the staffing levels have been relatively static during this period of time, let's say around the last decade. The impact of this on enforcement means that the staff often have less than a single day to conduct inspections, collect samples, analyze the samples in needed, this is of air and water quality, and issue a consent for consent to operate or consent to establish. And that is exceedingly short amounts of time to effectively do your job. Then lastly, on the question of legal staff, since SPCBs also engage in legal action against violators of pollution norms, we noted that there is little to no in-house legal capacity at SPCBs. A lot of the work is really outsourced. And the fact that most SPCBs have less than a handful of legal staff means that appropriate paperwork is not necessarily checked before it's filed. A large proportion of it is just written out by environmental engineers and passed. And this could potentially result in cases against violating industries being rejected at the stage of courts. To illustrate the fact that the growth of industry has not really matched the growth in staffing. This is an example from Punjab, where taking consent data from the state, we see that between 2011-12 and 2019-20, the number of industries has almost doubled, whereas the number of sanctioned positions has remained almost static, at least for the last 6 to 7 years. If we look at the positions vis-a-vis technical posts across all of these states, this is environmental engineers and scientists across 8 of the 10 PCBs. We notice that there is only one which is even above 60% occupancy rate, and a majority of them are much below 50%. And so this is a concerning situation vis-a-vis the ability of these pollution control boards to effectively deliver on their mandate. And lastly, this is an illustration of the number of days available per environmental engineer at each one of these PCBs to process one consent application. So in blue, you have the number of days available if all sanctioned posts were filled. And in red, you have the number of positions that are actually filled. And if you look at this, you have Bihar, Jharkhand, Punjab, and Uttar Pradesh, where environmental engineers, in effect, have less than a day to process each consent application. Now, granted, there may be several in this category which are either white category or green category industries, green category or orange category industries even, which may require less time to process, but that's still not enough time to do a thorough job or an effective job. The issue becomes much darker when you look at it from the perspective of regional offices. Now, as an illustration, we have a list here with Bihar has 5 regional offices, Chhattisgarh has 7, Haryana 17. And the number of environmental engineers per each one of these ROs varies substantially as well. So Bihar, for instance, the number of ROs per number of environmental engineers per RO is 1, whereas in Haryana it's 4.7. And if you take a sort of derived metric of the consents issued per environmental engineer at each one of these ROs, you see that the number is quite stark. I can't imagine being a single environmental engineer being able to issue 761 consents in the course of a year, nor in Uttarakhand 410 consents. So there's quite a wide variation in the ability of these ROs to be able to deliver on their work. On staffing, of course, Member Secretary of State 6 noted that they're grappling with a severe shortage of staff. There are only 100 people monitoring around 10,000 industries. Each officer is working 12 to 14 hours. This individual also noted to us in dialogue that they have a regular WhatsApp group amongst all of their environmental engineers with a sort of checklist of all the work that is being done, regular progress reports on each file that has been submitted for consent. But as per his own study, he noted that they need 3 times the current capacity in terms of man hours to deal with the current level of industrialization in the state. Regional office in charge of state 1 noted that he's barely able to go to the field and that inspections are done by others. In this case, either potentially somebody else junior within the PCB or more likely outsourced to a third-party inspector, and that he himself only inspects large industries and that too only sometimes. And so this is getting to the root of the problem. The chairperson of State 2 noted that there are always vacancies, and this is a point that highlights the challenges that they've had in hiring. So in his quote, he says, in comparison, a job as a sub-engineer at the PWD is considered a better job than the SPCB because the SPCB is an autonomous body, and it's considered a thankless job because it is notionally a government or government adjacent role, but with none of the benefits associated with the government job. And so that goes to challenges around benefits for individuals who want to be hired into these roles. And lastly, the chairperson of State 1 noted that given all of the tasks that they have and the staff crunch that they're facing, it's practically impossible to undertake all of their monitoring duties. They're working at 30% of their staff strength, and if you expect the state's pollution to be controlled with such a small number of staff, then I will frankly tell you that it is impossible. And so this is coming to the point of we recognize the significant constraints that they're functioning under, and so the onus is really on states as well as the union government to support them in carrying out some of this work. So the key takeaways from these reports are, one is that the regulatory landscape within which the pollution control boards, our frontline environmental regulators, are functioning is rapidly changing with the introduction of new policy frameworks, the increased use of technologies such as continuous emissions monitoring systems, for instance, and growing discourse around the need for market-based regulatory mechanisms such as emissions trading schemes. Now, the question is, if our SPCBs are challenged in executing their routine tasks even now, how can we expect them to rapidly evolve to meet these new challenges? And that requires significant staffing constraints to be rapidly addressed, augmented with upskilling of existing as well as new personnel. The lack of appropriately qualified leadership with long and stable tenures makes the fact that you are unable to plan and execute long-term strategy a big challenge. And lastly, the absence of oversight and input from board members who are not engaging meaningfully on the role that a board plays with respect to an organization places even greater responsibility on the shoulders of the leadership, the chairperson and the member secretary. The board of an organization is there to support the leadership in planning long-term strategy, in financial management accountability, and several other aspects. And we need our boards to really step up to do this job effectively. And lastly, just to close out the presentation, I just want to note that a lot of this work is done not necessarily just to point fingers at SPCBs, but to highlight the fact that they need substantially greater investment and support than they're currently receiving, and support that will help them realize their own autonomy and ability to act independently as regulators in the way that they were intended to under the legal framework. And this is sort of the larger purpose within which we are conducting this work. So with that, I'll stop sharing and hand over to Shivani.
Thank you, Bhargav, and thank you, Arunesh. So I also just want to kind of a final point, which is also kind of the context setting point that I realized that we have. While we did this research, keeping in mind the air quality of Indo-Gangetic plains, and therefore in some sense, part of our research was looking at air quality related regulatory work in pollution control board, we are completely acknowledging the fact that this is only a part of their work. So all the data that we've shown in terms of their work is actually doubly difficult, if not triply difficult for them, because they actually handle regulation on water, haz waste, and all sorts of other mandate that's been broadened under regulations that have come subsequent to the Water Act and the Air Act. Moving on from there, I'd like to quickly introduce our panelists for today and then start the panel discussion. We have with us Dr. Ashok Kumar Ghosh, who's currently the chairperson of the Bihar State Pollution Control Board and also head of research at the Mahavir Cancer Institute and Research Center at Patna. He's been part of several committees, government committees at state and central government. And therefore, sir, you're ideally placed today to speak on state environmental regulatory institutions in our country. Anumita, of course, all of us who are working here don't need much introduction to Anumita. She's Director of Research and Advocacy at the Center for Science and Environment, where she oversees air pollution and clean transportation program. Anumita, thank you so much for agreeing to be with us today. Dr. Pandey, welcome, sir. He's currently the adjunct professor at the Center for Policy at IIT Bombay, and he's also a part-time member of the Compliance Review Panel of the Asian Development Bank. He was previously an expert member on the National Green Tribunal and a senior officer with the Maharashtra Pollution Control Board. So, sir, you're uniquely placed to give us the insiders and the outsiders view on issues relating to State Pollution Control Board. And finally, Karen Shepherdson is a lead environmental specialist at the World Bank. She leads India's air quality management team and manages several World Bank investment projects in South Asia on solid waste management and waste reduction. Karen, we are particularly grateful to you for joining us so early in the morning from Washington, DC. Thank you so much. So now if I could invite our panelists to just reflect a little bit on our work, just 3 to 4 minutes would be great. Dr. Ghosh, if I could invite you first.
I'm Ashok Ghosh, working here as chairman of Bihar State Pollution Control Board. But by training, I'm a scientist. I work in a cancer hospital, and I'm head of the department of research, and I do volunteer over there. So it is sort of because it is a hospital that caters for very lower rung of society. So whatever time I contribute, that is voluntary. And I'm here as state chairman, Pollution Control Board chairman since January 2018. So it is almost 4 years and 4 years and 10 months. And many points that I have seen in the presentation, they are very true. Thank you for a very good summary of the state of affairs in the state pollution control boards. And whatever observations are there, they reflect the real state. There are many constants. Still we are working. We're still working and we are coping up with the shortage of staff, no doubt. But one thing has changed a lot since I came here, that the lack of staff we have compensated by making everything online. The total consent management process is now online. Grievance redressal is totally online. So it cannot compensate totally, but somehow the workload on one individual has decreased due to the excessive use of online consent process. Because that is the most difficult part as far as pollution control board is concerned. The consent part and the redressal of grievances. So both the things we have done online. So we are moving forward, and despite all the challenges, we are working, and things have changed a lot for good. I'll share, if you ask me a specific question later on, I'll share my more experiences with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ghosh. Thanks a lot. Anumita, if I could request you. Thank you.
So I must say I'm absolutely delighted to see these papers. As you know how obsessed we are about the institutions, and we have also been looking at SPCBs now for quite some time. And this assessment has come exactly, when we need air quality management to make that paradigm shift. And so therefore, what I really see is that these papers have really underscored very clearly why it is important to look at the institutional architecture, institutional capacity, and to take on the environmental governance, management, compliance, monitoring, all that role that they need to play. And in many ways, and the data that all of you just presented is a very incisive diagnostic of what is ailing the core regulatory institutions in the country. And they have, and in a way, you have also helped to identify the fault lines that need to be addressed by giving very clear indicators and identifying areas where we require the reforms. So when you mapped out the resources, staffing, technical capacity, the empowered roles, so all of that provides a good roadmap now. And if today, and hopefully that we will see the reforms taking place, then this can really inform that process. But quickly, some of the very key takeaways, and just to reiterate some of the things that you're saying, that what really concerns me, that if the regulatory institutions, they are not being able to perform their core function because of the institutional weaknesses, then how? And so if they're not well-resourced, sufficiently staffed, adequately empowered or capacitated, then how do we take on the new generation challenges in the air quality management field? And what really strikes me as important, and something that Bhargav just said, that today, if it's such a big challenge to play the role of that traditional command and control role that SPCPs play, but increasingly we want to move in the direction of the market-based instruments, smart monitoring, different kind of compliance monitoring. So clearly, the whole next generation reforms and the complexity of the instruments that are involved, it requires a lot more sophistication and institutional maturity. So hopefully we will be able to see that in that direction. And the last observation that I just want to make, that as you have also pointed out, that the way the clean air action plans and management is going to change now in the country, it is certainly going to demand a more expanded role from the SPCPs. So which means these SPCPs require a lot more commanding position, rallying power to play that coordination and cooperative work that is needed for multi-sector, multi-jurisdiction work that is going to be the hallmark for the change. And my final takeaway is that what you're saying about the SPCPs today, and today after the 15th Finance Commission funding, where all other departments are getting involved with Clean Air Action Plan, perhaps this kind of systematic assessment is needed for all other institutions and implementing agencies in the country. So this provides a very good template for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Anumita. And you're absolutely right. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we are doing this is because kind of looking at what the future regulator should look like. And learning from what the existing regulators are, where they're failing, where they're succeeding. I mean, those are the kind of factors we want to look at as well. Dr. Deshpande, if we could invite you now.
Thank you, Shibani. And first of all, congratulations for very comprehensive reports. I really read it with interest because I was part of different sides of the table. I worked as a consultant, then regulator, then NGT, and now academic. If you really see the genesis of state boards, it started with the Water Act. And if you really see the provisions, I want to correct here also, like if a board is formulated under the Water Act, there is no need of separation or separate board under the Air Act as per the law. So that provision is very critical, and naturally, gradually, all the states followed the same practice. Now, if I want to really talk about the performance of the board, first I need to assess the mandate of Section 17 as well as other provisions. And I think that one part will have to be looked very carefully, because if you see that Section 17 under Water and Air Act, they're completely different. Okay. In water, there are about 10 functions. In air, there are about 14 or 15 functions. Just off the hand, I am not precise on that. But if you see SPCB as an institution, I can tell you it's a dream job. I would like to explain that. Because if you have so many variety of functions within an organization, like enforcement, then compliance, then you have research and monitoring, you have technology evaluation, go to the air and as well as water act, very specifically. Then you have public awareness and engagement, including education, and then finally planning and evaluation. So I don't think any job in the government or private sector can provide such a wide array of the job or functions for any regulator. And I think that's why the role of the member secretary and the chairman is absolutely critical. And many of the states have a pivotal function of member secretary and some have pivotal role of the chairman. It varies because liberty is given to the states to formulate state-specific regulations. So continuing with performance evaluation indirectly, what has been done so far, I think the first report of that, the state board driven report was CRISIL report, which was prepared by MPCB. You might have seen that. Luckily, I was sort of domain from the board. And definitely, when we talk about problems of the board, they cannot be solved only with increase in the manpower. I can tell you a simple sentence, which was, I heard when I was asking for more manpower was, more the people, more the problem. That was simple assessment given by the highest political bosses. So they said, you come out with some innovative tools, maybe use of covenants, use of economic instruments, use of some new tools like circular economy, resource efficiency, and all those things. So only manpower centric things may not work. The other thing which I really liked in the report is comparison between the states in terms of consent and other things. Let me tell you, each region of this Maharashtra will have about 5,000 to maybe more, 7,000 consents issued. So it's a sheer number. So whether boards are ready to take some new advance to, like as Gosab said, every board is a computerized institution now. Most of the consents are given. In fact, some of the states use latest technologies like blockchain and all other things. But when we talk about innovation, everything comes to consent only. We don't talk about the core, that is the evidence-based policy, evidence-based enforcement, the data which is coming up. Board is a repository of huge data, air quality, water quality. Like in Maharashtra, we have 400 water quality stations. And that's why we have more water polluted stretches. Similarly, in air quality, we have 100 stations. I don't know how many Bihar have. And that's why we have 18 cities which are in the non-attainment cities. So you monitor more, you get more problems. So this is one thought process with the board searching. So overall, I think we need to look more critically into the mandate. One just example, when I was a member of NGT, many of the boards were not aware they have to formulate the standards. They have the function under Section 17 on water and air. And I don't think any state board, till the intervention of the NGT, has formulated the standards. Everybody just adopted what CPCB has taken or what MOEF has notified. So, and that's the starting point. And we are missing on that. So at that point, I think initially these
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Deshpande. Karen, if we could invite you now for final comments.
Great. Thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure. We've been talking about back and forth with you that this work was coming out because it is very highly relevant to the support that the World Bank has been trying to provide on air quality over the past few years and looking ahead. So it's really excellent to hear the framing too about this discussion in the context of a lot of institutional change happening in India and also still to happen in India related to air quality management. So that context of the need for the paradigm shift and how things are moving. This is just a highly relevant topic, and you've gone down to a level of granularity that's very important. One of the other context is the development and the need for state action plans. So the level, the importance of the state for air quality management has also been highlighted in India because of the need for broader airshed management planning and the connectivity of the state with also other states and at the airshed level, but also this nesting of work that needs to happen with the cities and even the rural areas. So again, very, very important work. I wanted to just flag also how it connects with a couple of other things that we've been doing. And it also, it has the messages resonate in the same direction. We just recently did a Jobs for Clean Air report, working with the National Knowledge Network, and a number of colleagues from India participated in that analysis that came up with 42 job functions for air quality management that are essential. That report also pointed out this balance between, so it looked at the National Skills Qualification Framework for India and how those functions fit within that framework. And it looks a little bit at that technical versus administrative balance and what would be needed. And it clearly comes out when they went into job descriptions and what type of, not only of course basic educational requirements are essentially needed, but also what are the skills needed on the job. And when you look at it, in air quality management, there's a lot of technical skills required. And so it is concerning to hear, and to now put that together with your analysis that says that really it's those technical positions that are lacking. So in terms of the job descriptions and those functions, there's a certain number that are sort of like a B, like a high school technical. Those are more the field administrative type of staff, but the vast majority are at least a bachelor's in technology type of level, and then many at the master's and at the PhD level. So we have to recognize that in this air quality management actually there's a fairly high skilled technical capacity that's also required, and that needs development, and that may not be embed into the institutions. One of the other things I wanted to just, maybe it's a question we can talk about a little bit more, but is the issue of this analysis is all on the state pollution control boards, but we also have environment departments in states and the need for the capacity development there as well. So we recently also did a review of 6 countries, again, to look at the global experience. We looked at 6 large federated countries on air quality management, and to understand what are the attributes that are critical for making this paradigm shift. And some of them are, we have the legal and regulatory framework has to be in place. There needs to be committed executive. You need to develop this nested planning. So all the different levels of government are important, with that state level one still, or province or wherever in a country important, but this horizontal and vertical coordination. So and then the accountability and transparency mechanisms. And on the coordination, so some of those functions may or may not be regulatory, they may be more policy. And so that's the sort of the environment department versus the pollution control arms in the state government is something to think about a little bit more. Underneath each of those big 5 buckets, there were also other components that came out as common things, like the need to clearly define those roles and responsibilities, to really look at the government capacity. So that's what we're talking about here today, and look at that independence and evidence-based expert advice. So where do you get that? So that use of the functional reach and the powers, which I heard several people already sort of mentioning, and transparency on the data and citizen participation and the legal side. So many of the issues that you already raised.
Right. Thank you so much, Karen. And we're looking forward to all this work coming out and reading about it also going forward. I'll jump right into the panel discussion now because I think we're a little behind on time. But and also remind all our colleagues who are on the part of the webinar, please do drop your questions in the Q&A. We've already received some questions. So just moving quickly on, I'll start with a question for Dr. Ghosh. Dr. Ghosh, you were one of the chairpersons who's had a relatively long tenure, also a full-time chairperson, also someone with a technical background. So, I mean, you tick the boxes that many don't. So in that context, we wanted to get your perspective on what that has meant. I mean, what's the benefit of having someone who's a full-time, holding the position full-time, in terms of the key leadership positions that we have right now, particularly in the light of the Supreme Court judgment, which required the issuing of recruitment rules, something that we've looked at in our study. And also, sir, I'm just picking up a question that came from the audience already, sir, that clearly we're seeing there's a problem with staffing. So we just want to understand between the board and the state government, where is the ball? Who is holding on to the ball of staffing and taking decisions on that?
Yeah, actually, 2 points you have raised. First, about the technical expertise of chairperson of the board. Of course, it helps. I came here as an academician, and slowly I learned administration. But having the academic background helped me a lot because I was able to comprehend the environmental issues. I was able to understand the problems and many times solutions also. Because my life, whole life as a academician, I have taught environmental sciences and environmental engineering. So the first advantage was there that nobody can fool me with wrong advice. I know when the advice is right, when it's wrong. And I know what decision I have to take. So I listen to everybody, environmental engineers, the officials, the government officials, but ultimately I decide what I feel that is perfect for protecting the environment. My role is protecting the environment. That is the basic role. And of course, development is also important. You have to balance it. But then to understand that technical background is must. So I always prefer that there should be mandatory on each board that any chairperson or member secretary should have some knowledge, not essentially a scientist like me or an academician throughout like me, but they should have idea about environmental issues. It should not be a new thing for him. And also full-time, because with changing time, the responsibilities of the board is increasing. Even in my tenure, whatever the workload was there in 2018, if I compare it 2022, it has increased a lot. It is not the same that I was here. So it is very important that chairman should have a technical background, full-time, and also tenure. That is also important. Because, you know, in government bodies, or even we are not actually government, we are semi-government, we are autonomous bodies, it takes lots of time to move things. It's not that the chairman is capable of writing everything. I have many powers, but also many constants. So many constants are there. I'm answerable to board, not to the state government. But at the same time, we get many funds from state government. And for that, we have a linkage with state government also. And it is, you know, sort of semi-autonomous, like consent mechanism or formulation of the standards, that is autonomous. We are not interfered by the government. But if I have to appoint staff, I have to get the clearance from the state government. We are governed by service rules framed by the state government. And that is one of the reasons that we are very short of staff. You might have seen in the graph that we have many sanctioned posts, but many of them are empty. We are running short of staff. So that constant is there. But still, in my tenure, I have not found much interference from the state government in every decision. Sometimes we get some phone calls from the department or concerned minister, but it is not very frequent. I personally feel, I don't know about other boards, but I have not felt any big problem from government side. I had freedom, lots of freedom to work, and I'm working freely. And the moment, the day I feel that I don't have freedom, I'll quit. I won't work without freedom. That is not possible. But yes, it is not at loggerhead. I'm not at loggerhead government. Whatever I suggest is logical decisions that I convey to them. And one more thing I would like to add, that is the board, constitution of the board that was raised here. That is a very important issue. As of now, the constitution of board is not fair. The constitution of board is, having heavily loaded with government personnel, with no knowledge of the environmental background. The board should be constituted by technical experts. Not all of them, but majority of them should have some idea about the environment. So like if you put in board some politician or some urban body, local bodies, ward commissioner, or something like that, who is there on some elected body and he or she is on board. But when they come in the board meeting, they don't have anything to suggest. Just they listen and then they sign and then go. So what contribution they have? The board members should be there who can contribute something towards the benefit of the board. Not the sitting member and just listening to everything and okay, it is okay, that's fine. That is good for chairman, that no question is asked, but that is bad for environment because board is there to give a guideline to the chairman. And if the chairman is a knowledgeable person and the board members are not able to give him any advice, why the board is there? What is the purpose of the board? Just keep meeting together, and so that should be rectified. I strongly recommend always that it should not be 100% technical persons or 100% academicians. It should be a balance. Right now it is not balanced. Majority of the board members are either government officers or local urban body representatives or some politicians like that. A few experts are also there. And that is why, for my purpose, to get the expertise, what I did in Bihar State Pollution Control Board, that I constituted my own subcommittee under chairman of environmental experts from different sectors. I have the experts from IIT Delhi in our subcommittee, from IIT Patna, from IIT Kanpur, Indian School of Mines, Dhanbad. So many of them are good scientists, good knowledge about air pollution, water pollution. They have done modeling. They're quite known person in the field of environmental issues. And what I do, that if I get any serious problem related to technical issues, I call the meeting. I get their advice, first online and if required offline also. So that is sort of, it is not an official body, but I have powers. The chairman has power to constitute subcommittee under him, just to give me advice. They don't have any power. They don't have any power. They are just advisory body. And nobody stops you to form an advisory committee. You are free to form an advisory committee. So that is one thing that I have done. Second thing, equally important, that is shortage of staff. That is a big issue. And there are lots of complaints, lots of inspections going on for city and so that. And we have shortage of staff. We have very limited staff. To balance that, once again, I have formed a panel of external experts. What I do, that if any complaint is there and any inspection is there, at least one member has to be from State Pollution Control Board. And to assist him, 2 or 3 members, expert of that area for which you are going to inspect, they are included. Final say is by, final comment is report is written by board employee. But other persons, they give input because they are experts of that field. Like suppose I am going to inspect some brick industry. Then the man going to the brick industry should know what is brick, what type of brick is there, how many types of kilns are there, what is the siting criteria for the brick kilns. If you don't know these things, you can't do it. So that way I compensate the shortage of this stuff. But these are the stopgap arrangements. Ultimately, somebody has to resolve it and the number of staff has to be increased.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ghosh. Actually, you, I think, preempted some of my questions, which I was going to ask later. So that was, you put them all together very nicely. Thank you so much. If I could actually ask a question to Anumita about airshed regulation. I mean, it's something that you worked on. CSE has also written on it. It finds a place in the NCAP that we need to move towards regional and airshed level planning. I understand why we need it, but just focusing on the institutional structure that would be required, because it would require us to move away in some senses from the current structure. If you could tell us a little bit of what that would entail, that'd be great.
Right. So what is good is that NCAP now has technically recognized the idea of regional approach and interstate coordination. So that opens up the opportunity now that, and in fact, NCAP mentions comprehensive regional plan backed by regional source apportionment studies, and even listed series of measures that can be taken up across multiple jurisdictions, like that. But the question is, the idea is there, but we still do not have the regional level interstate coordination or the framework for it, for a formal adoption of integrated management of airshed. So what do we need to do? One, very clearly, as far as the air quality regulator is concerned, we need new knowledge systems to support the idea of regional air quality management plan. So we need to strengthen the science monitoring first to delineate the airshed. That what is the airshed? And now, even though SPCBs have now started to support studies that are estimating regional movement of pollution, like it has been done for Delhi NCR as well. And they are also taking up satellite monitoring, etc., as an alternative method of assessment. But this has not been leveraged yet to create that framework in a way that how do you establish the responsibility between the upwind and the downwind polluters? Because that is what will have to be defined very clearly. And this will also have to be supported by monitoring that happens at the micro scale, neighborhood scale, urban scale, regional scale, to know how this needs to happen. The other element that we need to look at institutionally is the legal backup for the delineation. And as you and many of us have been saying for a long time, that perhaps for this, we do not need fundamental reforms in our act, maybe that provision of to declare a critically polluted area that SPCBs do, or severely polluted areas can be applied in a more expanded manner to perhaps even declare the entire Indo-Gangetic Plain as an air quality management zone. So there's a potential and opportunity to do that. Now, while we do that, we also need, but that's where we need some legal reform, that how in that zone, you therefore need to establish the responsibility of the states. Because right now we do air quality or clean air action plan for a city. But in that, we are not taking into account the contribution from outside. Now, if we begin to do that, then even the contributor also has to account for it in their plans to ensure that there is a good neighbor policy like they have in the US, so that they do not, so they can actually first identify the threshold of contribution to someone else's air quality. Now, those things will have to be detailed out, because if we do not work out this, whatever the significant or contribution to another state's non-attainment status, then what will happen is, even if the science emerges and data emerges, it will all boil down to a blame game. But we have to understand that we still need a legal framework, because what we are calling blame game today, tomorrow it will then become litigation, because states will then litigate against each other to say, because of you, I have not been able to get an attainment status. So that's where we need a lot of reforms today. And what is more important, that while the state government, so at one level, we need to do that framing at the central level. Maybe we need to create a council of states to come together to be able to expedite this. And while we give responsibility to the respective states to come up with a planning of that kind, that they take a regional approach, but if they fail to do that, then CBCB and the Central Ministry of Environment, they need to step in with their own regional plan for harmonized action and regulated action for all sources across upwind and the downwind states, with a mandate for time-bound implementation. So this is where we need to focus on, and this also requires multi-sector regulations between states and so forth. And finally, what I'd say is that therefore the institutional architecture, and maybe we can reflect on that later, the way it is emerging in Delhi NCR, but that supra body that we require, but we need this complementary strategy where you do have a supra body, but which is much more aligned with the local institutions, actors, and regional level accountability. It can be established through this process. So I think I'll put that on the table.
Great. Thank you, Anumita. A lot of food for thought there for all of us. Dr. Deshpande, as you said, you've been part of the MPCB, and I believe your current research is also looking at enforcement strategy. So I thought if you could move to, Anumita also talked about responsibility, and that kind of leads me to questions of enforcement as well. How, given the constraints on staffing that we have, can pollution control boards strategize and ensure better enforcement? How can they strategize differently?
I think the ultimate goal is to have a clean environment, maybe clean air, clean water sort of thing. I think that's the larger objective we are talking about. So one thing is very sure, if we really concentrate only on the regulator, like pollution control boards or CPCB or ministry, the problem is not going to be solved. The problem is definitely a multifaceted one. We have to consider the capacity building of all the stakeholders, like industries or common effluent treatment plant, sewage treatment plant. And we don't have that type of sort of holistic efforts or holistic research, except the last one, what Karim mentioned in air quality. We did some work to identify different stakeholders, right from who repairs the air quality equipment. So we don't have a standardization for repair of these high volume samplers or something like that. So point is, if we were planning about capacity building in order to achieve the desired quality of environment, we need to consider beyond pollution control. So that is the first one. Then secondly, within the pollution control board, I think when we talk about the number of the people, firstly, we need to think about, can we do something different or maybe differently? That could be one point. Like, for example, I remember in early days, the field officers were not given target or some number of samples every month. But when a financial model was evolved and they were given the vehicle and then all the things were so smooth. So the infrastructure and also some innovations are also required besides number of people. That is one. Now, thirdly, we talked about different functions of the board, and take example, even in air quality. We have requirements, something like modeling, air quality modeling, then we have air quality monitoring, then we have hazardous air pollutant, which require different set of expertise altogether. And then we need some theoretical analysis for some carrying capacity, CP index. So different levels of expertise and knowledge is required. But unfortunately, I think everybody will agree with me. In pollution control board, normally all these posts are jack of all and master of none. My experience is you send them for training in air quality modeling. They get very good training by going somewhere else, and next month they will be transferred to some different departments. And this is the core issue. And that's why, in fact, there is a huge need that we need to support the boards to strengthen their scientific capacity in terms of pollution assessment, monitoring, and surveillance. If that is strengthened, then naturally the upper ladders or upper steps, like maybe a responsible sanction procedures. Like today, we don't have any centralized guidance on how the board should take enforcement actions, and at what stage the closure should be issued, at what stage the pollution fine should be imposed. There is quite arbitrariness, and that's why the board's job is now not treated in a good fashion. They call it as a different type of institution. So if we have, and that's why they go to the court, and court normally get them smashed. So point is, unless and until we have some documentation, standard protocols, standard procedures, standard guidelines, there will be less time spent in arguments, litigation, and controversies. I think we need to consider when we talk about manpower, we have to think it in a very broad picture, not on a just sheer number of the people.
Thank you, Dr. Ishwan. Definitely, I mean, that's something that we're also finding that we have to do the best we can almost with what we have. And that probably requires, as you put it very nicely, to do things differently and not just different things. So thank you so much for that thought. If I could just move on to Karen now and ask you a question about, and we mentioned that in research as well, that there is kind of now a call for something other than command and control kind of approach to regulation, and there's a shift towards some form of market-based mechanism. We've had a few over time, we've had water cess over time, but now there's kind of pilot studies happening, more state governments are getting involved. So my question to you is that how do you see this kind of public discourse evolving over time, moving from command and control to market-based mechanisms, and how well prepared are we for that move?
Thanks for that question. There's a tremendous need to have both of these types of approaches. So a lot of the countries, when you do look internationally, have actually made dramatic drops in their air pollution through the application of market-based mechanisms. For example, SOx and NOx emission trading in countries have been critical, especially in the early stages of air pollution reduction. So that's something really for India to consider. Currently, there is the PAT scheme that is run by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, and that is already working with all the same large industries and thermal power plants in India, and it's already doing trading on energy efficiency. Ready-made mechanisms, but maybe not the coordination needed and the push to actually apply these for those topics. But that's something I think I see that as a low-hanging fruit. We also, of course, have the work that's been done in Gujarat that everyone knows on the PM2 emission trading that is very innovative. And in fact, that's and in the United States, we've seen some NOx emission trading on the Eastern Seaboard, for example. So certain states just decided themselves to coordinate on through the transportation sector. So there's different points of entry that could be developed. And so if the readiness is not there in a particular area or a sector, maybe you could also enter into that in other places in India. The command and control, though, is also important. And India actually is really strong on that. So I think what the issue is in India is it's so strong on one thing and it's not as strong. So that balance needs to be brought about a little bit better. You have something, the Green Tribunal. I mean, I don't know any other country that has that type of a mechanism at the top that's able to push, and then there are certain controls. But the work that you just brought out on the regulatory side also points to these human resources gaps, and the capacity for that are critical. From the World Bank, we want to shift to support India to actually make a bigger investment in air quality management. Now it's the need of the hour, but the capacity issues are just central and core to this. The investment in the capacity has to be considered at the same time as investment in all of the measures and the activities that need to be done from our perspective. And that's why we've been involved in trying to support wherever we can, bringing in some comparative experience and also information to help that dialogue. But it's really an Indian dialogue. We are a partner, and the decisions have to be made domestically.
Right. Thank you so much, Karen, and thank you, panelists. Actually, because we just have 15 minutes, and we're keen to bring questions in from the audience as well. So I kind of try and pick some questions from the audience, and if that's okay with the panelists, and request specific panelists to answer. There's a question, and Anumita, this one I think I'll direct towards you because it's also something we wanted to hear from you about, is the CAQM, and you mentioned that, is the new institution, and it has kind of the representation is fairly wide in terms of central government as well as state governments. So what is it that actually is required to ensure this coordination across federal structures, and also what works? We know what doesn't work, but if you give us a few instances of, in your experience, specific instances of perhaps regulators and their design, which has actually worked in India.
Right. So I'll give the example from Delhi NCR and CHUM. The Air Commission is clearly emerging as a template. I'm not saying, it's just emerging right now for a sub-regional institution for overseeing the pollution control action in the larger region with multiple state governments. And so it has very clearly and legally defined the geographical area and the multi-jurisdictional aspect of the whole intervention. Now, it is like an overarching body. And it is, now what is interesting about this is that the Commission is now empowered to take decision and enforce action and also develop plans for the larger region. Now, with overriding powers and so forth. Now, but as a supra-regional body, one important, now first let me look at the positive of this. So right now, when they have very recently came up with their new policy for the region, the whole exercise was able to mobilize a lot of consultation across region with the departments of different state governments. Now, out of that, therefore, you are getting a decision like a coal phase out by 2024 in the industrial areas of NCR, okay? Or coming up with specific waste management regulations where the state governments are pointing out the importance of aligning the clean air action with what the sectoral actions are already underway, like Swachh Bharat Abhiyan and the funding strategy for it, and how that can be integrated with a larger clean air policy. So some of this framework were discussed and taken on board and integrated for the larger framing of the action plan. This also allowed a framework in which you can decide, depending on the capability of the region, the tier 1, tier 2, and the small towns in the same regions, that while they all need to move towards the same goal, but their timeline and their nature of interventions are going to be different, right? So these are some of the positives that open up. But there are challenges as well, as we see, that you still are, so that supra body is fine, you need that for that harmonized conversation and discussion and uniformity in some approaches, but it still has to operationalize within the larger federal system of state governments, and where the state governments have a very independent, autonomous way of functioning. And therefore, to setting timeline, action, mandate for them can be quite a challenge. Unless a proper institutional arrangement in terms of interdepartmental cooperation, system alignment, process development, enforcement mechanism are worked out in detail at the local level in each city and state, where they can actually internalize and mainstream the action plan, then there will always be a gap between the top down and what the bottom can do. So we really need to work a lot more on that framework, that how that bottom-up responses will work, especially at the state level, to address institutional inertia, to address pushback from lobbies, lack of capacity, systems, and accountability, because still those things will have to be really worked out at the local level. So the Air Commission framework, therefore, is kind of giving us an opportunity to see that how that executive system and the processes can be established for responsibility and accountability within the federal system of NCR. And that's the larger question that we need to address.
And I think we're all waiting to see how the commission performs, right? I mean, it's going to be a great case study.
The performance depends on all these elements.
Yes, definitely. So there's a question about the performance appraisal, as it were, of state pollution control boards. And Dr. Deshpande, if I could bring you in here, as you mentioned, in 2005, Maharashtra did one of the first ones. And then, National Green Tribunal directed the CPCB and the MOEFCC to then take on this performance audit in the Aryavart Foundation case subsequently. So how often are these, I mean, NGT is an external institution in that sense. How often, if at all, are these audits conducted, or do you think, and you know, how often, how should they be conducted in your opinion?
Just a minute. Two things here. Actually, whatever audits you are talking about, or I mentioned, they were initiated as a standalone case. There is no structural system of annual audit or something like that. But yes, there is an annual report which is supposed to be presented before the state legislation. In fact, that report itself should give an indication about the overall performance of the board. But as you know, many of the boards actually submit it maybe once in 3 years or something, very infrequently, I should say. But now I think there is a need that we need to talk about something called regulatory impact assessment. That's a very standardized process elsewhere. And when we have a certain law or an institution, what actually impact that organization has made in 1 year? How many directions were issued? What is the cumulative investment which was brought to it? How much pollution load has been received? Whether it has gone to some compliance level. So that type of performance audit is not really envisaged in the existing law. But at the same time, I must say, CAG, Control of Auditor General, they have done subject-specific performance audit of some of the books. And they are very fantastic resources. If you really go through their reports, like I remember they have done it for air, they have done it for biomedical waste, hazardous waste. Not all the boards, they have taken some samples. But I think that should give some idea that these state boards should need, or they should conduct such type of study, at least thematically every year for one theme or two themes. I think that's required.
Right. Thank you. Dr. Ghosh, if I could bring you in here, you still have, yes. Dr.
Yeah.
There are some questions with regard to the kind of enforcement policies that the board decides to take. So for instance, we see that there is some boards have now started moving towards bank guarantee being forfeited. Some are clearly preferring not to go down the criminal enforcement route, power given to them under most environmental laws. I'm just curious what the strategy behind this is, and if there is kind of a regulatory pyramid that the PCBs, or particularly the Bihar Pollution Control Board, is thinking about.
Yes, we have the power for seeking bank guarantee to defaulting industries. And the quantum of the bank guarantee is decided by the nature of default, whatever wrong has been done by them. One assessment is done by our board analyst. And based on that report, we fix that how much bank guarantee we should charge. And we give certain conditions that if you comply for all these conditions for 1 year, we will return the bank guarantee. And if you don't, then we'll seize that. And it is working. We started with sugar industries, and then we have extended it to hospitals also now for the biomedical waste. And we have asked for bank guarantee from many industries. And now things are changing through that. And not only that, you all know, Green Tribunal has provided us with some teeth that we can charge environmental compensation also to defaulters. And there's a well-defined formula for imposing the penalty. Based on that formula, from time to time, we also, after all the notices exhausted, then we do go for environmental compensation also. These things, these two things, the bank guarantee thing and also power to charge environmental compensation, that has given some teeth to Bihar State Pollution Control Board. Earlier, when this provision was not there, I used to say that Pollution Control Board is toothless and without clause, just a big structure and capable of doing nothing. But slowly we have some teeth now, and things are changing. People are listening to us. Earlier, the letters went to the different agencies and they ignored it simply. But now they do not ignore. They take cognizance of the letter and they respond. If the hearing is there, they come. And ultimately, if nothing works, then we impose fine. And that way, some of the deficit is also, our budget is always in deficit. Because, in Bihar, we have very few industries, not lots of industries. So we are not, fund surplus. So that way we are generating some fund also that can be utilized for different environmental management practices, and that we are doing it. And also through this mechanism, slowly, the awareness is also increasing. Earlier they thought that pollution control cannot do anything. But things have changed now, and hopefully more stringent orders will be levied on that. And we are working on that. And time will tell that how far we can go to protecting the environment. Because it is very difficult to quantify the damage done by an industry. It's a difficult task, but it has become a bit simpler through the formula given by NGT. Although sometimes we have faced the problem, if you follow that formula, then the fine is become so high that the proponent will prefer to shut down the industry rather than to pay the penalty. So under that condition, the limit is also there. We go under the limit, and we try to balance the fine so that the industry should not be closed, but they should mend their ways. They should care for the environment. So that is happening. That is happening. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ghosh. I would call that a slightly positive note to the otherwise, I think, depressing findings that we had.
There are many problems. I don't say that I don't have problem or boards don't have problems.
You did mention that.
But then you have to work. You cannot always keep complaining, I don't have manpower, I don't have this, I don't have that, I won't do anything. That is not work, that never works. Whatever resources you have to manage that. And somehow, whatever you can do, you have to do. And that actually we are doing. And just for information, one good practices of Bihar State Pollution Control Board has been selected to be reviewed at the COP meeting. That we worked with UNDP, and we worked with the UNDP for mapping of the bricklines. We have 8,000 bricklines. It was a very difficult job to map the bricklines of Bihar because of lack of manpower and resources. We tied up with UNDP and University of Nottingham, and using satellite imagery and artificial intelligence, now we have exact GPS location of all the 8,000 bricklines. And also we know that which bricklines are in cleaner technology and which one of them are not. So that was a big thing to achieve, despite the staff constant, because remote sensing, we did nothing. We got the remote sensing imagery through work of UNDP. And artificial intelligence was done by Nottingham University. And we have a very good database about bricklines.
Well, congratulations, sir. And we do hope this work can be taken forward.
Yeah. And we are also working with World Bank and also with UNEP. We are working actively with UNEP on zero carbon emission target of 2070. Actually, we have started that. And state level action plan, we are working with World Bank. So we have deficiencies, and that deficiency I'm trying to work on through collaborations. My buzzword is always either collaborate or perish. Don't go on complaining if you have something, not if you don't have something, import it. That is the way. And today I'm happy that world bodies like UNEP, UNDP, World Bank, they are helping us, and they are holding the hand, and we are getting benefit, we are getting the results. So my attitude is always positive, that don't keep complaining all the time. I don't have this, I don't have that.
Right, sir.
Try to work with whatever you have.
Good to know, Dr. Ghosh. So I'll have to wrap up for the day on that note. Thank you so much to all our panelists. I just want to say that couple of just final thoughts that that this is just the starting point of research on environmental regulators, and we do hope other organizations and the government policymakers also engage on this issue, because we do really think that environmental governance institutions really do play a very critical role, and not to focus on them is really something we do at huge risk. So I hope this is just a starting point of the conversation with this. And I just want to end with thanking a few colleagues who were very much a part of this research. Sharon Matthew, who was with us and and Dr. Santosh Harish, both of them were part of our project, no longer, but thank you so much. And thank you everyone for tuning in today. Our reports are all available online, and we'd love to engage with everyone, even offline. Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Just one point, just to conclude from my side. A great big thank you for preparing the reports. Tomorrow, the first thing that what I will do, I'll send all the reports to state government and ask them that give me some posts. Otherwise, I'm going to shut down the Pollution Control Board. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you so much.
We'll do wonders with the state government.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining.
Thanks a lot for joining.
Thank you all.
Thank you.